Loads happening. Loads. Nicholas Wilson hour 2, Tony Gosling this hour. Now, you know the way the police always have intimate knowledge of the terrorists after the fact. Well, I think it reached new levels of absurdity today. And I don't mean any disrespect to anybody who was caught up in it. I really don't. But I mean absurd today. One of the London Bridge attackers was filmed previously. And he was arguing with the police while unfurling an ISIS flag. Quite extraordinary development that. That was revealed by the Daily Mail today. Now, 2 of the men who carried out the attack have been named by police this afternoon. Scotland Yard identified the men as Khurram Butt, that's Khurram, K-H-U-R-A-M, Butt, B-U-T-T, 27 years old, from Barking in East London, and Rashid Redouan, he was 30, also from Barking. There's one other man shot dead, they haven't named him yet, but they've named the men anyway, known to the police, as I said there. And extraordinary, really, you know, to think. And if somebody, in Ireland we say, if somebody belonging to you, which means if one of your relatives was killed, murdered, or caught up in that, you'd want to know how the police would argue with the guy who was unfurling an ISIS flag and how they could ever lose track of him. But it gets worse, because a man who knew one of the attackers and actually reported him to the police never got a call back from the police in London. Never got a call back. Now, the man's identity was protected by the BBC, understandably, and they used an actor to read his statement. So this is a man saying that he reported one of the attackers, said some very serious things about him, but never got a call back.
2 years ago, we spoke about a particular attack that happened, and like most radicals, he had a justification for anything, for everything and anything. And so that day, I realised that I needed to contact the authorities. I phoned the anti-terrorist hotline, I spoke to the gentleman, told him why and how. I told him about our conversation and how and why I think he's been radicalised, and basically, you know, just doing my bit.
And what came of that?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They didn't get back to me, nor was he arrested or, you know, just picked up for any kind of questioning.
Were there any other people in the community that tried to object to his views or to try and put him on another path?
Yes, he was thrown out of a mosque maybe over a year and a half ago, his local mosque, because of his radical views. He had an altercation at some festival where he had a table to invite people to his religion. So yes, there were people. There were people.
Were you surprised to hear that he was behind the attack in London on Saturday night?
Yes and no. I wasn't surprised in the sense that because of, you know, his radical views, but there was still a little hope in me that it wasn't him, because this is very, very hurtful to his community. I mean, the Muslim community in general, get a lot of criticism over how we don't root out extremism in our community. I did my bit. I know a lot of people did, but the authorities didn't do their bit. And that's what's shocking. That's what hurts me, really, because this is just giving a bad name for my community now.
Isn't that very interesting indeed? And he makes a very valid point there, does that man, that those on the extreme right often criticise men like him and other Muslim men and women for not doing enough, whatever that means, to, you know, to prevent the radicalisation of people and to prevent extremism. But he's clearly saying there, I told the police, they never got back to me. Now, some people will say, oh, the police don't care. But if their budgets had been cut, have been cut even, and if they've been slashed in the way we're going to hear about in a minute, and if there were thousands of officers light or thousands of officers down on the numbers they need, you can see how it happens, how somebody doesn't give somebody a phone call back. But I still can't get over the video shared by the Daily Mail of the man with an ISIS flag and how they could not take him seriously as a threat. So on to the policing then. You know, since we got the Suicidal Conservative Party manifesto, I've been asking the same question pretty much every 2 or 3 days. Are the Conservative Party is the Conservative Party, I should say, throwing the election to the Labour Party? Now, consciously or unwillingly? Been asking this question for over 2 weeks. Today was another horrendous day for the Conservative Party and for Theresa May. And I made the point today, speaking to friends of mine, that she looks very much like a dead woman walking. Now, after a press conference in London where she was talking again about getting international regulation of the internet to tackle extremism, and we'll certainly talk about that shortly, the media plunged the knife in about cuts to policing that she made in her time as Home Secretary. This was pretty brutal. Theresa May today facing the media.
This morning, Cressida Dick said that in the light of the attack, absolutely we need to look at having more police, more forensics, more intelligence officers. Do you agree? And would that mean you were wrong to cut numbers?
A question on those police cuts. You talk today about stamping out extremism, but isn't it a fact that 20,000 police cuts has meant that there have been cuts to neighbourhood policing, cuts to community policing, cuts in exactly the place where you need to stop this ideology growing? Was this raised while you were Home Secretary as a problem, and what are you going to do about it?
Andy.
Prime Minister, you accused those who were concerned about police cuts of crying wolf. Do you accept now that you were wrong to say that they were raising legitimate concerns? And do you commit to restore those 20,000 police officers that were cut since 2010?
That particular question there about crying wolf, in any genuine democracy, would bring down the government. It would bring down the Prime Minister. And you'll hear May in a minute, when she was Home Secretary, addressing the Police Federation, where she basically accused them of making up stories to support their, complaints about the budget cuts and that. But the media were really on the case. There's more of this. Have a listen.
2010.
Prime Minister, the most direct experience that members of the public see in terms of efforts of a government to keep us safe is the number of police on the streets. On your watch as Home Secretary, the number of armed police officers fell. It's still lower than it was in 2010. The number of officers fell in total by 20,000, as we've been hearing. And also control orders that monitored terrorists were watered down. Now, if you mean what you say this morning, that this election should be about leadership and it's your number one priority to keep the public safe, would it not be leadership to say that you would reverse those cuts?
Well, of course, she didn't say anything like it. And she basically gave mealy-mouthed answers, to use that phrase, that didn't make any sense at all. Pretty bad day for Theresa May. Some polls are now saying there's only 2 points. Some polls saying 3 points between Labour and the Conservatives. This is extraordinary if you believe those polls, that only 3 weeks ago she had a 16 point lead. Or is it extraordinary? Anyway, here she is 3 years ago as Home Secretary addressing the Police Federation, accusing them of crying wolf in response to their warnings about the consequences of cuts.
This weekend, the Federation warned that spending reductions mean that we'll be forced to adopt a paramilitary style of policing in Britain. Today, you've said that neighbourhood police officers are an endangered species. I have to tell you that this kind of scaremongering does nobody any good. It doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve the officers you represent, and it doesn't serve the public.
Yeah, you see, there's no escaping that. That should destroy Theresa May. That should be the end of it. I don't think I'm exaggerating here, over-dramatising it. I'm not. I've been covering elections for commercial radio for a long, long time. That should be the end of any Prime Minister, especially today, especially today when you have people dead and injured. And you have the mayor, you have journalists, you have former Tory party spin doctors coming out basically saying this is untenable, that you could have accused the police at one stage of crying wolf, and now when it comes home to roost, when there are mass casualties on the streets of London, now you don't have any answers. Now, Jeremy Corbyn saw the sun shining and tried to make some hay. Here's Corbyn speaking with the Independent newspaper today.
Given her record on policing numbers, there have been calls for her resignation. Would you back those calls?
Indeed I would, because there's been calls made by a lot of very responsible people on this who are very worried that she was at the Home Office for all this time, presided over these cuts in police numbers, and now is saying that we have a problem. Yes, we do have a problem. We shouldn't have cut the police numbers.
So to be clear, you would like to see her resign over this?
We've got an election on Thursday, and that's perhaps the best opportunity to deal with it.
Yeah, now since then he's been interviewed by the BBC and Sky, and he's gotten a bit narky, he's gotten a bit petulant, because he's kind of rolling back a little bit now on him saying that, you know, he would support calls for her to resign. So he's rolling back on it. The Mayor of London, as I mentioned a minute ago, Sadiq Khan, he weighed in too about the devastating effects of the cuts.
Can I just say this, which is really important, which is we need to make sure that the police have all of our support as citizens, giving them information, but also it's a fact that the more resources the police and experts have, the better job they can do. I'm on record over the last year expressing my concern about the police not having the resources they need to keep us safe. I'm really pleased that the police do a fantastic job with the resources they have, but it's just a fact that over the last 7 years, we as a city have lost £600 million from our budget. We have had to close police stations, sell police buildings. We've lost thousands of police staff. Over the next 4 years, there are plans to cut a further £400 million from our city's policing budget. There are plans to change the police funding formula, which could mean we lose up to £700 million on top of that, which leads to a total loss of our policing budget of £1.7 billion. And we don't receive the right level of funding as a capital city we should receive. We receive half of the funds we should be receiving, 170 million versus 370 million.
And if you think it couldn't get any worse than that, it does. Even Conservative Party stalwarts got in on the fun. David Cameron's Director of Strategy, a guy called Steve Hilton, said her position is untenable and that she should resign. What's going on? You see, what's going on? We'll talk more about it shortly. What's going on? Have a think about it. Former senior policeman Peter Kirkham said not only are they destroying police forces, they are knowingly lying to the public and Parliament. He spoke with Sky News' Kay Burley and said this.
We hear talk of extra police officers on the street. They're not extra. They're officers that have had their rare leave days cancelled. They've had their 12-hour shifts that are now done routinely extended to 16 hours. They're being drawn from other areas. The officers we see behind us are from Kingston, from Hounslow and Hillingdon. They're not extra officers at all. They're from other duties and they're being burned out.
But more armed police officers on the streets than ever before, we're told?
No.
Armed police officers on the streets than ever before?
No, they're not. Basically, people that are alleging that are lying.
So the government are lying?
Yes.
The Defence Secretary's lying when
yes, they've funded bringing us back to the number of armed officers we had in 2010 by 2020.
Of course they're lying, and I think the reason there has been such undercutting and underfunding of the police is not down to, you know, allowing terrorists to come in under the radar. I don't think it's about that. You know, the intelligence services are the ones who should take the blame more so about terrorists coming in under the radar. That being said, if the police were properly funded, of course I have to accept they might be able to assist the intelligence services and follow some of these guys. A lot of this was about privatisation, I believe. That's just my opinion. I think a lot of it was about, you know, David says problem, reaction, solution, destroy the police service, and people will cry out for action, will cry out for a response to make the police, to make policing better and to make it more, you know, accessible. And you provide them with the ready-made solution, and that is to bring in privatisation, to bring in outside firms to run the police, is my opinion. We've talked a lot about that. Now, May talked at length today about there being no hiding place for extremism all types of extremism. There will be agreements on policing the internet for hate speech, said May. Now, after she said that, there wasn't much questioning on it because, as you heard earlier, the journos wanted to take her to task on the cutting to the police while she was Home Secretary. So she wasn't pressed to give exact details of what does constitute non-violent extremism, nor will she be at any time anyway, because I think it's whatever she wants it to be at any given time. Now, the only time Theresa May was ever pressed on what non-violent extremism is by any journalist was just over 2 years ago, while again she was Home Secretary. She was on Radio 4 with John Humphreys interviewing. Now, I think it's fair to say he was mildly incredulous, if you can actually be mildly incredulous. He was mildly incredulous at what she was telling him about tackling non-violent extremism.
We are talking about the extremism of all sorts, Islamist extremism, but also other forms of extremism like neo-Nazism, that is seeking to promote hatred, that is seeking to divide our society, that is seeking to undermine the very values that make us a great country to live in, that make us this great pluralistic society.
And how do you divide a society then? Let's assume, for instance, that a group of people put together a meeting at which they expressed views about homosexuality that you or I might perhaps find repugnant. Would they be dividing society?
What we're talking about here is an extremism that has an impact, that is divisive, that is trying to undermine our values.
Well, that would be divisive, wouldn't it?
That is trying to undermine our values. But the reason that we're doing this is, first of all, because we do need, I think, to ensure that we are together as one society. We are one nation. We are working
Speaking
to
with
ensure
one
that
voice?
there will be different views within that nation. Of course there will be different views.
Indeed.
And nobody is suggesting that different views cannot be expressed.
Theresa May on BBC Radio 4 a couple of years ago, struggling to explain what it is that constitutes non-violent extremism, the dictionary even, the dictionary definition of it. There was more to that interview.
But one of the reasons for looking at this issue of extremism is the path down which it can lead people. And what we can see often is that this extremist preaching, this message of hatred, this message of intolerance can actually lead down a path of radicalisation.
And what I'm trying to get you to define is at what point it strays into that area, at what point it doesn't become just a disagreement with you or me or the bloke next door or the woman next door. It becomes something that should worry us to the extent that it should be banned. That's what I'm trying to get at. At what point does it qualify for being banned?
And obviously, when we introduce the legislation which has these banning orders, one of the tasks in that legislation will be to ensure that we have the definitions properly, so that they can. Well, we have a definition of extremism, which we have in our extremism strategy.
But you seem to be saying you'll know it when you see it, which is a bit unsatisfactory.
I'm not saying we know it when we see it, John. The whole process of introducing legislation in this country is that actually you start off with the principle of what we want to do, which is to ensure that we can promote British values, the values that unite us as a society.
Promoting British values. You can't have legislation to promote British values, can you?
But
law that says these are our values, and if you don't agree with them, then well, what? You go to jail? I mean, how do you promote British values in a legalistic sense?
Well, pretty much you go to jail. Eventually you go to jail. Eventually they will say that any opinion that you express online, if they deem your opinion to be an opinion that encourages somebody else to do something, maybe violent, well, that's dangerous. You can't say that. And if you keep saying it, well, we'll take action against you. Of course, May wants to leave it as an open definition. We'll say what's extremism. We'll say what it is when we see it. We'll decide it whenever we see it. We'll decide it. Pluralistic British values, my arse, eh? So there you go, 22 minutes past the hour. That's what's been happening today. There's been other things happening as well. Of course, this is the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on davidicke.com, Fab Radio 2 and TuneIn Radio. I'll be back with you in a minute after these.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever.
Richie Allen.